Hi, I'm Ellen Halliday, Deputy Editor of Prospect. You're about to watch the interview portion of the latest episode of the Prospect podcast with this week's special guest. For the full episode with additional discussion from Prospect Senior Editor Alona Ferber and myself, click the link in the description below to listen via your favourite podcast app. And if you'd like to read more of Prospect's award-winning journalism, visit prospectmagazine.co.uk. We're talking now a few weeks on from the anti-immigration riots that spread across the UK from 30th of July to the 5th of August. And the violence has thankfully died down as many of the perpetrators are now going through the courts and being brought to justice. But while the immediate threat of unrest has passed, at Prospect we felt this was an important moment to ask how the far right came to be powerful enough to make these riots happen in the UK and what can be done to stop it from happening again. To talk about this, we're going to be joined by Paul Mason. Paul, it's lovely to have you on the podcast.
It's great to be here.
So, Paul, we're now a couple of weeks on from these riots beginning. What have we learned since about how they came about and who was involved in them?
Well, in the essay I wrote for Prospect, what I was trying to do as someone who studied this for a while and did a deep dive in retrospect into what led up to it, I was trying to guard against the idea that over here we've got the general racism of society, we've got sort of GB News, we've got the 14 years of Tory government, and then we got over here, Southport, one thing, disinformation takes off, and within 24 hours you get a riot. In between those two layers of reality, both of which are true, you had about a month of incitement by the far right. And those of us who engage with them and study them are all too familiar with what their themes are. But what had happened is that, first of all, the far-right influences, we have to distinguish between the fascist organizations with leaders and far-right influencers who are much more influential with followings on Telegram, Twitter, Gab, Discord. These influencers had, first of all, switched to a project of becoming the foot soldiers of reform. They were delighted at reform's surge. They understood, as many Labour candidates understood, that surge had momentum even in the last week of the election. And they were thinking, well, where does this go next? We can become their army on the streets. And since they're not disavowing us, and we noticed that with Farage, again and again playing to this gallery, there's a good chance that we ourselves, the far right, can gain from this momentum. What they were focused on was the prospect of Tommy Robinson going to jail. Tommy Robinson was due in court on, I think it was the 31st of July for contempt, and they expected to go to jail. So they were building for a rally in London on the 27th of July, and that rally, in the end, did attract 30,000 people onto the streets of London. Now, in the process of building for it, they continually play on incidents that took place. So there was the Hare Hills riot. Then there was the Manchester Airport incident, which is some judicy, but everyone's seen the footage. Then there was a stabbing in Gillingham of a soldier. And so what you got was the theme of migrant/refugee violence and the two-tier policing of that violence, which again harks back to their far right's complaint, and more than just the far right, that the Gaza demos were leniently policed from the point of view of incitement and indeed terrorism. Okay, so it's all building towards Tommy's arrest, but what happens is that Southport happens, and instead of the whole thing being around Robinson, it flipped. So Southport, then Sunderland, and then the riots take off. And so what happens in those crucial days is that these key influencers, and I named them in the article, the key influencers were saying things like, and you have to go on Telegram to listen to them. That one of them I quote in the piece, James Goddard, who lives in Thailand and was at the time banned from Twitter. And he's saying, I'm not calling on anybody, I'm not inciting anybody to do anything, but if I was to go on an act of civil disobedience, I would wear a mask, leave my mobile phone at home, and make sure that I've got no Nazi memorabilia at home. Okay? So, and numerous of them do that. So Robinson then tweets, just before the Sunderland riot kicks off, he tweets a list of places to assemble. As I show in the article, 2/3 of those places, riots took place. So, yes, it was to do with reforms surge, but these riots wouldn't have happened, I believe, without specific incitement from the far right influences. And with a couple of exceptions, who I think have been arrested or indicted and therefore against sub judice, most of the people who incited this are not being arrested because they're too clever. You know, Tommy Robinson says, kill the rioting guys, have some discipline, get to the gym. You're going to be facing years in jail. Don't do this. He says that. Um, Stop him tweeting the article saying where to go. I think the next phase of law enforcement is going to have to focus on the incitement rather than the kind of pathetic people we're seeing go to jail, you know, because they drank 10 pints and threw a stone at a policeman.
So when the riots are happening and the police and the local authorities kind of come face to face with the people who are rioting, do they know what they're even looking at? Do they understand the network behind this kind of far right, these far right riots?
It's like watching sort of Z cars in the internet era. It's like watching. It's in fact the internet's had this effect on everybody, hasn't it? On classical music, on football data. As soon as you mobilize networked information, everything about reality changes. And so we've got localized police forces, proudly local police forces, Devonshire police, sort of Dorset police, dealing with not just a national phenomenon, but a global phenomenon. Because these people live in a world of global far right, sort of a global far right ecosphere. And what matters to them, what drives them, can change from day to day. And when it changes, what we notice, those of us who study the modern far right, is it changes everywhere. You know, I was once in Sweden, it's about 3 or 4 years ago, talking to left-wing monitors of the Swedish far right. And they said, I bet the Swedish far right today are talking about the Walker's Crisp brand. And they went, how did you know that? I said, well, because that's what they're talking about in Britain, because Walker's Crisps are advertised by Gary Lineker, who is anti-racist, and therefore they're also halal, as are nearly all products like that. And you can just predict what they're going to do. Now, in the run-up to the riots, they clearly decided to make 2 tiers of policing the thing. They then virally broadcast the riots. There is a lady called the Norfolk Lion who broadcast the Stoke-on-Trent riot live, and she's shouting, as someone was injured in a clash with local Muslims, she's shouting, he's been stabbed. Now, the police immediately issued a thing saying no one's been stabbed, but meanwhile, I watched this in real time, and she's giving a commentary on the rioting, and she turns from elation to fear, to be honest, because when the Muslims from the mosque came out, they weren't feeling very fascist all of a sudden. But in the middle of it, I watched this, a person came up to her, a man in his middle age, and he said, well done. And she said, how do I know you? And he said, I follow you. So okay, you're Stoke-on-Trent police. You think, hold on a minute. How did everybody get here? Who's streaming the riot in real time? If you're doing your job, you may have had a unit monitoring the local far right, or maybe the security service monitors certain people on the far right because there are terror threats. But in no way on earth are you going to know that Andrew Tate, Tommy Robinson sitting in Ayia Napa, there's a guy called David Clues who has apparently fled to Latin America and is also one of the key influencers. You're not going to understand what their issues are. So police and then local authorities do social cohesion work. Of course, they have their budget slashed for that, in fact, cancelled. But they don't have a global perspective on it. The people who do are the NGOs, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, Hope Not Hate. There's various of them. And I would say to anybody listening to this, much though I think the work of academia has been important in understanding the far right, academia, like economics, has several theories of what the far right is, it's all out of date. And it is unless it's based on real-time research. Do not go to your local university and ask who's the expert on the far right. Fine, listen to them, but the real people who who understand this are people sitting on Telegram right now. I mean, I'm one of them. I'm sitting in a group of 5 people on Telegram watching certain people because we're now seeing in the aftermath, maybe we could talk about this, in the aftermath of the riots, the themes have changed. And one of the themes is they're going to get the journalists who are on their case. So yeah, act locally because they act locally, but you've got to think globally when you're up against the far right. And in other words, you've got to understand what their theories are. One of the points I always make is the modern far right is intensely theoretical.
I think that's such an interesting point and something I actually want to ask you about in a bit more detail, because we've been talking in this conversation about the far right. We've also used the term fascism, and we use that in the magazine when we talk about some of these ideas. But fascism is, for a lot of people, quite an old concept.
Yeah.
So what do we mean when we're talking about fascists today or the far right?
Okay. In the late 20th century, it was kind of agreed that fascism had been a one-off, was of its time in Central Europe, 1920s to 1945. It was finished, and therefore you could study it as a finished fact. And this was a view held by conservative historians like the famous Ernst Nolte of Germany, but also by a guy called Tim Mason, no relation to me, who was the British expert on fascism and was a Marxist. So they all agreed fascism was a one-off. I have never agreed with that. And I think modern academia who study the far right kind of do agree that it can be a recurrent thing. And therefore, you then get into for me, fruitless debate about defining it. Give me a definition. Well, for me, fascism is a process. It's a process of social disintegration. It produces parties like the NSDAP, the Nazi party. The actual thing we're studying is not the party. It's the process. The process, the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci called it a process of social disintegration. So, okay, with that caveat, yes, I think we do have to have 3 categories. Right-wing conservatism, which is now playing to some of these themes. Right-wing populism, which discourages democracy but doesn't want to overthrow it. You know, there's the enemies of the people. They don't like judges. They want referenda, not elections. And then fascism, what usually, well, for me, defines it, is it's the only one of the 3 whose objective and overt aim is global ethnic civil war. Nigel Farage might warn, unless you listen to me, there'll be civil war. You might get far-right conservatives saying something similar, but the fascists overtly want to smash democracy, kill lots of people, and at its most extreme, enact genocide. Okay, so I can show you that that's what we're dealing with. In the article, I quote James Goddard again. He's a minor influence. He's nothing like Tommy Robinson, but Goddard does this rant in the middle of the riots about how they're going to arrest all Muslims in Britain, take all their property, put them all in jail. So that's 2.9 million people, and then, quote, send them back to the third world shitholes that they came from. So you have to learn to read fascism. You have to, first of all, the lesson of the 1970s fascism studies was take them at their word. Don't think that they're talking in metaphors. And so when Goddard says, we're going to arrest you all, we're going to seize all your property, so all your homes, 2.9 million homes, and put you all in jail, 2.9 million people in jail, and send you, what he means is what the Nazi Gauleiter Odilio Globocnik meant when he said, we're going to send the Jews across the Bug River. So Globocnik was the head of Operation Reinhardt, which killed 1.7 million Jews in southeast Poland, and he never wrote that he was going to kill them. He just kept saying, in fact, they were an afterthought for Globocnik. You just said, we're going to send them across the river. That's what fascists mean. If you go online, they'll often say, I think it's time to round up every Jew, every leftist, every feminist, and kill them. And then they'll go, but only in Minecraft. So Minecraft is a game that your kids might play, so you can reenact fantasies. I make the point in the book, How to Stop Fascism. Genocidal thought is everywhere on the far right. Okay, so you have to be aware, if you're in public life, that this exists and it's small, i.e. the fascist organizations are mainly small, but after these riots, their central myth, the myth that they promote of ethnic civil war, is out there. And anybody like Nigel Farage, who is not overtly disavowing it and saying this is a danger, we mustn't go anywhere near it, anybody in the Tory party who's playing with the same rhetoric is running a really dangerous game. And I'm afraid we know where it ends, but we probably haven't studied enough exactly how right-wing populism in Germany in the 20s and 30s and right-wing conservatism adapt to fashion, because it's not exactly like it's depicted in Babylon Berlin. It's far more that there were million-strong right-wing populist parties who thought that the Nazis could just be their boot boys. And indeed, Hitler himself at one point said, just as Tommy Robinson has said, kill the violence. The violence is not doing us any good. We have a bigger project here, guys. You have to accept that something like fascism exists, whatever you want to call it. It's a far-right, violent, genocidal, global in this sense, not nationalist anymore, global sort of violent reaction.
And we've talked a lot about figures like Tommy Robinson, and you obviously mentioned James Goddard, who kind of his videos are really astonishing to watch and listen to hear to hear how much energy as well he's putting into making them and sending out those messages. But we wanted to ask you a little bit more as well. You just touched on that the role of mainstream politics and political figures and pundits in legitimizing the movement and the discourse and growing the movement. You said we don't know exactly that maybe the relationship, they're playing a dangerous game, but surely they do know the effect of that game. I mean, it seems a bit. It's not that these figures don't know how dangerous the game is, right? They know their role is big in growing the movement. How would you explain that?
I think there is an intermediate layer, okay, between, say, the Reform Party and, say, for example, Lee Anderson, who identified a hotel on the very day of one of the riots as being inhabited by migrants, and started ranting about he didn't want men roaming around before realizing it was a bunch of nurses from Britain, ethnic minority nurses who were on holiday. That is a dangerous game. There is an intermediate layer of people, and here I will just talk generally because I think we know what we're talking about. There are journalists who pop up on GB News, occasionally on Talk TV, occasionally in The Spectator, which I occasionally write for because I like to sort of address everybody. But there's a kind of layer of people who've begun to make extreme far-right radical thinking popular. That combined with, see, Lawrence Fox retweeting Tommy Robinson, Lawrence Fox trying to bridge the gap, speaking at Robinson's events. We've been here before in 2018 when UKIP invited Tommy Robinson to be an advisor. That's when Farage actually left. So much that I want to say to Farage and say, Badenoch and Braverman in the Tories, you're playing a dangerous game. I also want to say to them, there is a road back for you. It's the road back that you took in 2018 with Farage. You say, no, we don't want anything to do with anyone inciting violence. I would rather see the right-wing populism flourish than fascism. Because right-wing populism can be defeated, as we're seeing now with Trump in America. Fascism, if the myth of the Civil War takes off, if everyone who's gone down, might be 1,000 people now in jail, by the end of next week anyway, has family, and instead of thinking what a stupid thing we did, they think, no, that's it now. We're the Bolsheviks of the revolution. We're going to come out of jail in 2 or 3 years' time. We're going to do this. That is something we don't want. And so I think that my appeal to any readers at Prospect, or anybody who listens to this, who is on the right of politics, is just engage with a little bit of reflection about what happened in the 20s and 30s, because both in the case of Mussolini and in the case of Hitler, they were created by rich people and by the patronage of conservative parties.
Us kind of forward, you mentioned earlier in our conversation kind of some of what you've been seeing since the riots. Sounds like there's some pretty kind of grim conversations, frightening conversations happening on messaging apps and social media platforms. Could you tell us a bit more about what you've heard and what you think it means?
The one thing that we're missing, and hopefully law enforcement will have this, is the WhatsApp groups and the Telegram channels I mean, I could give you loads of examples of Telegram channels where people, during the riots, were inciting each other, deciding what targets there should be. But Robinson's strategy, first of all, let's go back to the theme I introduced earlier. Robinson is a global actor. So he is being signal boosted by Elon Musk. British fascism, if you look on the Telegram channels, is being both signal boosted and sort of slightly, its agenda is being shaped by American, we call them accelerationists. These are the overtly armed insurrectionary wing of the American far right who exist openly because of the First Amendment. And what we're seeing in their channels are, first of all, one thing to get your head around, the text of this year's riots was Islamophobia and hatred of refugees. You do get in British fascism a subtext of anti-Semitism, but Robinson, for example, like Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, is pro-Israel. In American fascism has gone down the route of open anti-Semitism, and so what you if you got there are some of the more extreme channels. These places that have 21,000 followers. Some of them will be in America, some of them will be in Britain. You're seeing, the COVID was a Jewish plot. The riots are an Israeli plot. So that's, if I was law enforcement, I would look there. As to the politics, Tommy Robinson's strategy is to become the alter ego of reform. And here's an interesting thing. One of my mates, because he likes doing these kinds of things, went to Reform's HQ and just started talking to the doorman. And the doorman said, no one's ever here. There isn't really a Reform party.
Where is Reform's HQ, Paul? What city is it in?
I picketed it in, it's in Victoria, London, Victoria Street, just near where the old New Scotland Yard used to be. It's in a tower block. You can't sort of visit it. But this, combined with the fact that Reform is a party, Reform is a company, a limited company with no internal democracy. I don't think it really has branches. It has until the self-organized branches, and these are the branches that produced all these nutcases they had to actually kick out of their candidate list. But here's the danger. Farage has a leader-led relationship with the Reform voters. I mean, there's 4 million Reform voters. Their only relationship with him is via GB News, is via the internet. And here's the problem. That's the same relationship that Robinson has with his followers. And so could Tommy Robinson sort of take over the Conservative Party? No, because as the UKIP was found when they joined en masse after 2016, the kind of Tory shires are full of all these people who do jumble sales and church fates, and they're quite resilient. Could Tommy Robinson sort of colonize the leader-led, networked relationship that Farage has with the Reform voters? Well, YouGov found that 1 million, 21% of Reform voters think the riots were justified. So I'm worried about that million. 1 million people in Britain voted for the BNP in 2006 in the European elections. I'm worried about that group because Robinson says don't riot. What he wants is a demo on the day he believes he'll go to jail. And of course, meanwhile, he's out there. We don't know where he is now. He's out there somewhere. He's appearing on American channels saying, I'm going to go down. They're going to arrest me for my ideas, for the film I made. Meanwhile, you get this narrative again being pushed. Even the BBC has run some appalling headlines saying that some of the rioters are being sent down for shouting a slogan. They shouted a slogan, but they were already out on bail for paedophilia. The theme is that somehow Britain is policed and regulated in favour of Muslims and refugees and not white working class people, and therefore the next thing that's going to happen is a revolt about Tommy Robinson's arrest. And as we started, that doesn't mean that's what the revolt will be about. It means that everything they do, because fascism works, it's mythologies, something's coming. Ultimately, the Civil War is coming, but something's coming this autumn. Something's coming in October when Tommy goes to court. Well, I'd put money right now that something will happen in October. And the police and the security services and local councils and all political parties, including Reform, have to get ahead of that and disrupt it. Listen, the other thing was, of course, in November, we'll have the election in America. It now looks like Trump's strategy is to try and stack the electors, from each state with fake electors like he did last time. So he knows he's going to lose, but he's going to say it's illegitimate and it's not ratified. Supreme Court only has to rubber stamp that. And then we've got a contested presidency. Because they're so symbiotic and unified by a single language, the British far right and the American far right are very interactive. And we have to be very careful that they don't start the theatre of insurrection that will surround Trump's hopeful defeat in November could very easily find a route into UK politics. I mean, just for example, the party conferences. Party conferences are always very well policed, but I would be very surprised if we don't find Robinson, Goddard, all the rest of them, all these Lincolnshire Lion, or whatever she's called, the Norfolk Lion, out there with cameras in the outside bit, trying to evoke. Goddard himself, I didn't write this in the article, but what an interesting fact about Goddard is the reason he's going to Thailand is because he's banned from being outside Parliament because he harassed Anna Soubry during the Brexit situation. I've seen him do this. I've actually met him face to face. I've seen him do that. He walks up to you with a yellow vest, a big microphone, and what you don't see on the camera is two guys in kind of horror masks. I don't know what they call them. There's a kind of mask that they wear. They're utterly intimidating. If we don't get at least one of these fascist influencers trying to do that at Labour Party conference, I'll be very surprised.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us. I think that's all we have time for. But I did want to ask you one final question, kind of following on from what you just said about the US election and that symbiotic relationship. Given, I mean, obviously, when you wrote your book, How to Stop Fascism, you were looking at fascism globally, and we're all anxiously watching the American election. If Trump loses, it could still, he's said there'll be a bloodbath. It's quite a scary thing to watch. How do we even begin to counter that? You talked about, you would advise the police to look at Telegram channels, to look at kind of what's happening online. But how do you begin to counter that far right growth?
In the book, I argued for three things. We need a political alliance of the left and the centre. We need what I call a militant democracy. That is, we need to change rules of Ofcom, change rules of election rules if necessary, because democracies are not obliged to facilitate their own destruction. And the third thing is to create an anti-fascist ethos. Now, because I'm from the left, I'm on the left of the Labour Party, I will say one thing. I think the far left in America, which is large and influential, has been appalling. It has continually played to the same themes as the far right. I would say, whatever you think about the British left and it's the critique of it for anti-Semitism during the Gaza situation, it is incontrovertible that the parts of the American left have become anti-Semitic, and therefore you put some campuses hostile to Jewish presence. In addition to that, a large part of the left in America believes the Democrats are the main enemy. So you've got, even now we're speaking during the Democratic Congress in Chicago, you've got people outside, shouting the words "Genocide Joe" at Biden. Those of us who are historians of fascism have been here before because, as you may know, in the early 90s, the German Communist Party, which had 4 million voters and hundreds of thousands of members, identified the German Labour Party as the enemy, as worse than fascism, because it was bigger, and declared war on it. If we do this in America, that's what I worry about in America. I would say in America, get behind Kamala Harris, get behind democracy, stop confusing your critique of the Democrats with the idea that they are in some way the same or even worse than Trump. In addition to the pain in the nuts of having to follow the fascists, I do follow what the American far left say. I'm afraid it's just really quite disturbing.
On that note, thank you very much, Paul, for joining us. I mean, you can read Paul's essay on the cover of the latest issue of Prospect magazine.
Cheers.